The woman you got pregnant is fifth in line to the British throne. Fifth. And by the time you actually marry her, because yes, that is where this is going, she will be third. 2 people above her will step aside in 18 months for reasons you will not fully understand until you are already inside the machine. And the math that is about to rearrange every corner of your life has been running longer than your family has had a surname. Right now you are standing in a fitting room on Savile Row being measured for a morning coat. You did not ask for, while a woman with a clipboard asks which of your relatives have criminal records. Your cousin's DUI crosses your mind. You say none. The tailor adjusts your shoulders and says the posture you have is not the posture we need. He is not talking about the suit. Nobody in this building has been talking about the suit. In 9 months you will stand in a chapel older than the printing press and sign a registry that changes the line of succession. And the thing that nearly stops you is not the crown, it is a question asked over tea that you cannot answer. Just over a year before the fitting room you came to London on a youth mobility visa, your older brother. Described as a gap year for people who peaked at 24, which was not a compliment and was not inaccurate. You had a communications degree from a university whose name meant something only inside a 60-mile radius, and a resume that communicated precisely nothing, and a career trajectory that had made sense at 22 and stopped making sense somewhere around 25 without announcing the change. You split a flat in Hackney with 3 people you found on spare room, one of whom kept a fermentation project in the shared bathroom jars of something cloudy and optimistic that smelled like ambition left past its date. You worked at a media agency in Shoreditch doing something your mother described to friends as marketing. She said it with the specific confidence of a woman who had decided that follow-up questions would not help anyone. You were not unhappy. That was the problem. You were nothing in particular. Your coworker Priya was handling PR for a charity gala in Mayfair and needed someone to hold things and not steal from the bar. You owned 1 suit. You bought a pocket square at TK Maxx on your lunch break because the internet said it elevated things. At the gala, a woman in silk examined it for approximately 1 second and said, "That's very brave." You thanked her. She was already speaking to someone else. You understood in that moment, standing in a room full of people whose clothes did not require courage, that the fern in your life and the lives happening around you was not one that a 4-pound pocket square was going to close. Across the room, next to a man whose posture suggested he had been saluted recently and found it normal, was a woman in dark green. She was laughing at something she did not find funny, and you knew this because the laugh was perfect and complete, and arrived on exactly the right beat, and your mother used the same expression at weddings when she did not approve of the groom. Performative composure, the machinery of being pleasant for a living. You did not know her name. You would not learn it properly for another 2 weeks, and when you did, the word properly would stop being a detail and become a load-bearing wall in the story of your life. She told you her name was Ellie. She worked in family operations. You assumed consulting some boutique firm that managed trusts or estates for people whose houses had names instead of numbers. You were not technically wrong, which you would later understand was the most dangerous kind of not wrong there is. She was not the kind of royal whose face appeared on magazine covers. She was the kind whose name you would only recognize if you read the right kind of newspaper, which you did not. She checked her phone the way people in tornado country check the sky regularly, briefly, expecting something she could not control. She never showed you the screen. You never asked, which she seemed to appreciate the way you appreciate someone not testing a lock you have chosen to keep closed. You fell for her directness before you had a name for it. Morning walks through Regent's Park. You cooking badly in your Hackney flat because she said watching you try was the most honest thing about you. She never said it was good. She did not perform warmth. When she was warm, you felt it because she meant it, and that gap between performance and intention was the thing that kept pulling you back. At month 2, a copy of the Daily Mail appeared on your kitchen counter. Your flatmates. You established this immediately. She picked it up, looked at the front page 3 seconds longer than a front page warranted, set it down and said that paper is going to write about me one day. I would prefer it wasn't yet. You thought she meant she was ambitious. You thought she was talking about a promotion or a profile. The thought drifted through your mind and kept moving because nothing about it snagged. It should have snagged. 7 weeks after the gala, she called at 7:14 on a Tuesday. She said, "I need to tell you something and I need you not to react for 30 seconds. She told you she was pregnant. You reacted in 4. She waited. Then she said the second thing, her full name, her full title, the complete constitutional weight of the person you had been making bad dinners for in a Hackney flat. You Googled it one-handed sitting on the edge of your bed, and the results loaded, and you felt the specific sensation of a floor becoming theoretical beneath you. You said you wanted the baby. You said you wanted her. You said you wanted to stay. Every one of those wants was the kind that ends in a registry office or a chapel, and you understood, even then, that the registry this would require had been recording marriages since the 15th century. She said, I need you to understand what that sentence costs. You didn't. But you said it again because the version of you that said it was the version you wanted to be. That version had not yet been tested. The test, when it came, would not come from the crown. Within 72 hours of Ellie telling her family a man called who identified himself only as David from the household. David spoke the way a legal document would if a legal document had vocal cords precise, unhurried, every clause closed. He informed you that the matter was now being managed and did not ask whether you agreed to be managed. The word matter, applied to your unborn child, was the first thing you swallowed without answering. His next steps arrived as a 26-page document titled Relationship Protocol for Unannounced Associations of Senior Royals. Media engagement prohibited. Social media audited retroactively across 6 years. Prior romantic history required in writing going back 5. You spent 40 minutes trying to remember whether the woman you dated for 3 weeks in 2022 had an Instagram following large enough to qualify as a public profile. She had a ceramics account. You read all 26 pages at your kitchen table in Hackney while the fermentation jars caught the morning light and understood, that the life you had been living, the kind where you walked to a corner shop without notifying anyone, was now a historical period. Then there was Graham. Graham was your royal protection officer, polite and professional and built like a problem trained to wait patiently until needed. He accompanied you to Boots to buy toothpaste and called it a movement. You asked once whether you could walk alone. He said, you can, sir, but I will be 40 meters behind you, which is the same thing with extra steps. You stopped asking. Ellie explained the line of succession one evening using a minibar pen and a room service receipt. She drew it like a family tree that was also an organizational chart. You were surprised by how few names stood between her and the top. Her uncle had already renounced his place. A cousin was expected to do the same within the year. She said the distance changes. People step back. People die. It is always moving. She said it the way meteorologists describe hurricanes, factual, detached, aware that the thing described will arrive. Your mother called that weak. She had seen a tabloid photograph taken from what looked like 200 meters and captioned Mystery Man. She asked if that was you. You said yes. She said you looked terrible in that jacket. She did not ask about the princess. She asked about the jacket. Your mother has always processed things that are too large by finding something inside them small enough to have an opinion about. It is a skill. You are beginning to understand you will need it. You told yourself you were handling it. The actual feeling you were not ready to name was that every rule you learned replaced a freedom you used to have. And the sequence Ellie described had 11 days left before it moved again into a room at Windsor where tea would be served, and a question would be asked that none of the 26 pages had prepared you for. The meeting was arranged for a Thursday at Windsor. Not Buckingham Windsor, which Ellie explained was where the family did things that were personal rather than institutional. You had stopped believing those two categories were separate. You wore the Savile Row suit. It fit. You did not. The king was smaller than photographs suggested. He shook your hand with the grip of a man who has performed that exact motion perhaps 200,000 times and calibrated the precise pressure that communicates welcome without warmth, without interest, without anything that could be quoted later. He asked what your father did for a living. You said he managed a hardware shop in your hometown. The king said in a single syllable that contained a complete sociological assessment delivered without any of the vocabulary required for you to contest it. Lunch happened. You ate things you could not identify and did not ask about. Ellie's grandmother was 86 and sat in a wingback chair with the posture of a woman who had been sitting in wingback chairs since before your parents met. She asked you in French whether you spoke French. You said UN Pew. She switched to English with the expression of someone closing a book they had briefly considered reading. 4 seconds. Then she asked you to stay. She poured tea and set the cup in front of you and looked at you directly and said, "Can you tell me what she will lose by keeping you?" You opened your mouth. Nothing came. Not because the question was unfair, but because it was the only question in weeks of vetting and 26-page documents that had actually mattered, and you did not have the answer. You had been so focused on what you might gain that you had never once calculated her cost. She refilled your cup without waiting for an answer, which was its own kind of verdict. The private secretary found you in a corridor between two paintings, each larger than your Hackney flat. He said the family's position was that this could proceed provided certain accommodations were understood. The first. What you were entering was not a marriage. It was an accession event with a ceremony attached. You stood in that corridor for a long time after he left. You looked at the door at the end of the hall and calculated the distance between where you were standing and the version of your life where none of this had happened. 14 steps, maybe 15. You could still leave. The institution would close behind you like water. Ellie found you there. She did not ask what the private secretary had said. She said her uncle had told her at 14 that the only real freedom in this family was choosing who you suffered with. She looked at you the way she looked at things she had decided about. Then she said, "I chose." 2 words. She had known the cost her grandmother was asking about and made her choice with full knowledge of it. She had not asked you to match her, only to stay long enough to learn why she had. You turned away from the door. The grandmother's question was still open. You could not answer it. Not yet. Not in the way she meant. By week 11 inside Palace Coordination, you had attended 4 briefings on public conduct and 2 fittings and a genealogical interview and a dental appointment because your teeth would be photographed at the wedding, and the household had used the phrase orthodontic consistency with the family standard in the scheduling email without any indication that this was unusual. You read the phrase twice. It did not become less strange. You were becoming an object prepared for display. The display had a date and a guest list and an estimated audience of 30 million. You called your brother. You told him about the media training, a session where a specialist coached you to answer, "How do you feel about becoming a member of the royal family?" without technically answering it. You practiced 47 times. He went quiet. Then he said, "You sound like a hostage who's been fed well." You laughed, and it was the first honest laugh in weeks, and it landed with the specific weight of a man recognizing in someone else's joke the thing he had been refusing to name. You told yourself the preparation was necessary. The actual reason you had been memorizing seating charts and media non-answers for 11 weeks was that learning the system was easier than sitting with the grandmother's question. You had buried it under compliance. It had not gone away. Ellie came home being a 12-room apartment in Kensington Palace that had a name instead of a number, and found you cross-referencing the guest list against a seating protocol longer than your university dissertation. She watched you. Then she said, "You've been trying to pass their test. That's the wrong project." You looked up. "The test isn't whether you can learn the system. It's whether you can still be the person I chose after the system is done with you." You sat with that. You had not asked her what kind of wedding she wanted. You had not asked what she was afraid of. You had spent 11 weeks preparing for an institution and 0 preparing for a marriage. The seating chart was not wrong because it had errors. It was wrong because it was the only document you had been reading. You put it down. You asked her what she actually wanted. She was quiet long enough for you to understand she had been waiting for this question. A chapel, not the abbey. Your brother there. Food that did not arrive under a cloche. She had a list. She had had it for weeks. She had been waiting for you to stop running the maze long enough to ask the person who grew up inside it. You understood something else sitting there. The grandmother had not asked the question to stop you. She had asked it because no one else in the system, not David, not the private secretary, not the vetting officer, had thought to ask anything that actually mattered. And you had been avoiding the math ever since. The wedding was a negotiation, and she won most of it. Not the Abbey St. George's Chapel at Windsor, which seated 600 and which the palace described as intimate, a word that had clearly never been asked to carry that much weight before. Not 2,000 guests, 400. Your brother was best man. He wore a rented suit and during the rehearsal leaned over and whispered, "If I trip on the way to the altar, is that treason?" You told him you would find out. You did not find out. You stood at the altar in a chapel built in 1475 and watched Ellie walk toward you wearing the expression she used for things she had decided about. No performance. No managed warmth. The same directness she had used in your Hackney flat when she told you watching you try was the most honest thing about you. The Archbishop of Canterbury married you. The Archbishop of Canterbury. You processed this fact completely in the moment and did not understand it at all until approximately 3 weeks later when it returned to you fully formed in the shower. You signed the registry. Your name went into a book that has been recording marriages since the 15th century. The pen was heavier than you expected. The ink was black. Your mother sat in the 3rd row in a hat purchased specifically for this occasion. She was holding your father's hand. She was crying before Ellie reached the halfway point of the aisle. Afterward, she found you at the reception and said the flowers were lovely. She did not say she was proud of you. She did not need to. She had found the small thing she could hold an opinion about, which was how she had always carried the things that were too large to carry directly. 5 months later, your daughter was born at the Lindo wing at 3:47 in the morning. Graham was standing in the corridor outside your room. 200 members of the press were behind a barrier on the street below, their lenses pointed upward at dark glass, as though proximity might count as access. Your daughter arrived into a world that was already watching her. She had the specific indifference of a person who had not yet learned that any of it mattered. Her name was announced 4 hours later by a notice placed on a gilded easel outside Buckingham Palace, written in calligraphy on cream card stock and photographed by every camera that had spent the night on that pavement. Because that is how this family communicates births. Because of course it is. You stood at the window and watched the crowd cheer for someone who was asleep on her mother's chest, making a face you recognized because it was yours. She was 4 hours old. She was fourth in line to the British throne. And the grandmother's question, the one you could not answer at Windsor, the one you had buried under compliance and seating charts and fork diagrams, had just changed shape. It was no longer about what Ellie would lose. It was about what your daughter had been born into without anyone asking her. Your life developed a schedule set by someone you had never met. Tuesdays were patronage briefings. Wednesdays were approved appearances. Thursdays were correspondence review reading letters from strangers who knew you because television. You had been trained to look a certain way in public. Present, pleasant, peripheral. 3 words that described your function. None of them described you. You called your brother on a Sunday. He was in a pub. You could hear people and a football match and the sound of a room that had not been briefed or approved. He held the phone up to show you. You felt the specific ache of a man watching ordinary life happen without him. He said, "Come visit." You said you would check the schedule. He said you used to just come. He was not being cruel. He was reporting a change. At 2 in the morning on a night you could not sleep, you walked through the apartment in the dark, past the office books arranged by someone whose profession was making rooms look occupied. A desk worth more than every piece of furniture you had ever owned combined. You sat at it and felt nothing. You walked to the nursery. You picked up your daughter and held her against your chest and felt everything, the whole accumulated weight of 2 years arriving at once in the warmth of a person who did not know yet what she had been born into. Ellie found you. She sat on the nursery floor with her back against the wall in a t-shirt that said Glastonbury 2019. She said, "The palace is not the marriage. The schedule is not the life. I need you to understand the difference, or we will not survive this." She said it the way she said all things that mattered, directly, without decoration. You told yourself you had been adjusting. You told yourself the displacement was temporary. The actual truth you were not ready to say out loud was that you had been grieving a life you had already left, and a life you left was not even the one you wanted. It was the one where every choice was still theoretical and reversible. Here the choices were permanent. That was terrifying. It was also, you understood in a nursery at 2 in the morning with your daughter's heartbeat against your chest, what it meant to have chosen and to keep choosing. The grandmother's question moved again. It was no longer about what Ellie would lose. It was about what you were willing to become. You could feel the shape of an answer now, but you understood that it was not going to arrive as a statement. It was going to arrive as evidence. 3 years later, on a Tuesday in May, you take your daughter to the garden inside the palace grounds. She is 3. She runs ahead in the loose, unguarded way of a child who has not yet learned that anything is watching her. Graham is 40 meters behind. He has been 40 meters behind for 3 years. You have stopped noticing, which is its own kind of answer to a question you used to ask every day. She finds a stick near the hedge and brings it to you and says, "Sword." You fence with her in the garden of a palace in a country that has a king on its banknotes. She is technically 4th in line to the British throne, and she is hitting you with branch, and she finds this extremely serious and extremely funny at the same time. The absurdity has become the texture of your life. You have stopped fighting it. This is not surrender. It is closer to fluency. A card arrived last month from Ellie's grandmother, the same woman who tested your French and asked you over tea what Ellie would lose. Inside, in handwriting that was careful and unhurried, she had written, "She has your eyes and her mother's composure. This is a good combination." You read it twice. The woman who had asked what Ellie would lose had looked at your child and seen something worth keeping. Acceptance in this family does not arrive as a declaration. It arrives as evidence. You take your phone out. The lock screen is a photograph Ellie took you asleep on the sofa with your daughter on your chest, both of you still wearing your coats because you fell asleep before taking them off. You look in it like a man who has been sleeping well, which is accurate. You put it back. The garden is quiet. The wind moves through the branches. Somewhere in London right now, someone is standing in a fitting room on Savile Row being measured for a suit they did not ask for while. A woman with a clipboard reads from a document titled Preliminary Vetting and asks which of their family members have criminal records. They are doing the calculations you did, running the numbers on what it costs to stay, what it costs to leave, whether the version of themselves that says yes will be the same version standing there at the end. Most of them are doing it without anyone around them understanding what the math requires. Your daughter is 3 years old and fourth in line to the British throne, and she does not know this yet. The math that reshaped your life is still running. One day it will reach her. Someone will adjust her posture and tell her the one she has is not the one they need. You cannot protect her from that fitting room. But you can decide what she finds when she looks across the table for the person who chose to stay. If this one stayed with you, leave a thought below. Subscribe for more.